NBA podcast. I'm excited to be back because I kind of went MIA from basketball for 2 full weeks.
Yeah, you had nothing important going on at all. Like nothing was happening.
Yeah, but what I like about this is what will happen here is I made a point that since I've been back, I paid a little bit of attention to basketball, but I haven't fully looked or caught up. And I think it'd be fun to do it on the podcast. So I haven't looked at any standings since I left.
Wow.
April 14th was the last day I looked at standings and really did a deep dive on the NBA. So I figured for our warm up, we could do like a what did I miss thing. Some other things we will get into, which Kevin kind of told me topic wise we'll get into, is LeBron James being back, which again, I wasn't necessarily aware of until we started podcasting because I've been keeping myself in the dark. LaMelo being back, and then we're also going to talk the play-in tournament because I kind of remember as I left, Luka had made some comments about how he didn't like the play-in tournament.
Right.
And a lot of people were like, "Oh, you care now because you're potentially in it." So I thought that was kind of funny. The last two things I had on my little notes sheet that I usually pull up when we start the podcast. The last two things that I had that we were apparently looking into and talking about was KD returning and Drew Holiday agreeing to a 4-year max contract with the Bucks.
Yep. Yeah, we did talk about both of those things. Yeah, I guess. And for anyone who's listening to their first episode, Justin just got married and went on his honeymoon. So congratulations to Justin. Obviously, to you and Nicole, I guess that's first off. Justin is a married man. Come on, just show the ring. You got it. Just throw it up. Come on.
Right there. Yep.
Put it up for the YouTube viewers. There we go. All right. So welcome back. You've been chilling out in Mexico. And shout out again to Samby Albuquerque and Ryan Mayer for coming on and holding it down the past 2 weeks. I appreciate you guys.
Those guys, the real MVP. By the way, while I was in Cancun, I saw one team in particular on hats and shirts and stuff like that more than normal. If you had to guess what basketball, it was a basketball team that I saw. Which one do you think it was? I'm in Cancun, Mexico.
So more than normal?
Yeah, like I saw this probably like 8 or 9 times.
Oh, Brooklyn.
No.
Oh man, I figured because Brooklyn's like obviously been trending towards getting good, but like this is the first year they're elite.
The team that I saw the most, there were a few hats, definitely a few shirts, and I believe someone actually had a like basketball shorts. The San Antonio Spurs.
Oh wow, interesting. That's kind of interesting.
I thought it was very surprising that they were the team that was like around. I did see like a Miami Heat once or twice.
Like San Antonio obviously is a big like Mexican community with how close it is to the border and with how close it is in South Texas. So I get that element of it. You're in Mexico,
right?
So.
But it just seemed kind of surprising. Like I figured once you're out of the US, it kind of just goes with popularity of team. Like I figured I'd be seeing Lakers, or like
Lakers,
Celtics, Yeah. So, but I didn't see
Warriors recently.
I don't believe I saw any Warriors. I think I may have saw one Laker. I was trying to keep a mental note. I also saw, by the way, like 4 or 5 of these hats that said free Fortnite. And it was like this Apple logo Fortnite thing on the back of it. And I never asked the guys what was going on. I know a little bit about what's going on. There's a feud between Epic Games and Apple that can, if you want to dive in that, you can go to my nerd podcast, the Newbie Brothers. But yeah, I was surprised that there's like hats for that.
I mean, I don't know. See, that's the thing is like we talked about this before, but I missed the Fortnite wave, so I'm kind of behind on that. I've just still been playing Warzone. I love the new map, by the way. They really did a great job. Activision just killing it again.
Yeah. Well, to really put it in layman's terms, imagine Call of Duty being an app, right? Like you can play Call of Duty on your phone, which is what Fortnite is, but you can also play it on the game, on a computer, on all that stuff. And Epic has its own like game store where they want you to go through there to pay them for the microtransactions if you want to buy a new character or a new gun, whatever. So in Call of Duty, if you wanted a new character, you pay through them. Well, with Apple, Apple's taking a portion of those sales when they go through the Apple store. So Epic is trying to say, we want to go around you. And Apple said, cool, then we're taking you off our app. And that's what they did. So now there's like a whole legal thing going back and forth. So essentially, it's really weird and not necessary. It's people who make a lot of money trying to stop another person who's making a lot of money from making even more money,
Billionaire problem.
Exactly. So, all right, catch me up a little bit NBA wise. What are some things that I potentially missed?
Oh man, so Phoenix is now they're really close to the number 1 seed. They had a massive
Wow.
win over Utah the other night. They are a half game back, but what a statement for them. I guess that was probably the biggest game that happened this week. Is the Phoenix went out against Utah, and then Phoenix beat the Clippers recently as well. So they're definitely making some noise in the West. I mean, they beat the Knicks as well before this, which is no longer a punchline. Like that's something we talked about on last episode with Ryan. Like that's actually, the Knicks are good this season. That's the other
Yeah,
thing. You missed the Knicks and the Wizards going streaking. I mean, we had a whole episode last week dedicated to those squads going. And we'll talk more Wizards again a little bit in the context of the play-in game later in on the podcast. But the Knicks are going to make the playoffs in the Eastern Conference. I mean, this is a team who, again, I thought was going to be, competing for the number 1 pick this year. And instead, it just have gone on this impressive season. Julius Randle, playing at an all NBA
for
level. It
sure.
seems like he's sure a lock to win most improved player of the year award. So there's that right away. I mean, beside the Western Conference is kind of what you expected. The biggest thing, I guess, that we talked about is when Jamal Murray went down. So Jamal Murray tore his
Yeah,
ACL, and we, it kind of feels like, and again, when we'll come playoff times, we'll see how true this is and what exactly happens. But I kind of expected Denver to fall a step back a little bit, and that's why it was so disappointing. Is because you felt like Denver could be one of these teams that actually could win the conference if the Lakers
of
weren't
course.
healthy. I thought they were arguably the favorite if they weren't healthy. Um, they've casually gone 9-1 since then. Michael Porter Jr. is a prime ball-in candidate for the past 2 weeks in the ball-in and fallen. But they have. I mean, that to me has been super impressive.
Does
Again, they
does that does that kind of solidify in your mind Jokic's MVP campaign?
yes, yeah, he's been the MVP to me. And that's the season. But what it all comes down to is like Jokic's numbers have been historic the whole year. The argument early on when it was him and LeBron and Embiid was that, well, LeBron and Embiid are winning more and they're
Right.
doing the numbers are really close. LeBron had the age factor as well, but with Embiid, the numbers were close to Jokic. It just was on a better team. Now at that point, I mean, Denver's 43-21 right now. The Sixers are 42-21. So I mean, if we're talking strictly league standings, they're a half game back. The Sixers still have that game, so they could very well be tied. But you can't even really use the winning excuse anymore.
Yeah.
If you're going to argue against Jokic, like he's the clear MVP to me this season. To me, it's already been decided. I think there are guys that can make it interesting. Obviously, Steph Curry has been playing absolutely out of his mind these past 2 weeks. You were gone. Had that 30-point game.
Kev, I'm gonna mute you for a second. You started crackling a little bit there. Yeah, my problem with to your comment with Steph a little bit would be, I guess, when you look at the standings, right? Like the Warriors are in the 9th spot, as I pull it up for the first time here,
Yes.
which kind of, well, what didn't we have trouble giving Westbrook the MVP, even though he was getting the triple doubles or averaged the triple double on the season, but they were like the 6th seed in the West,
I don't think there was necessarily trouble with it. I think the argument, because Harden's numbers were so impressive that year too,
Yeah.
is I think there were people who were like, "Is this the narrative just because KD has left and gone to Golden State? Like, do we feel bad for Russ because he's here in Oklahoma City and he has to do it all on his own?"
Yeah.
I mean, to me, like Russ averaged a triple double for the entire season. Like, now, granted, he's
That's
done that
wild.
again since that season, which is still pretty crazy. But like, that's a record that had been broken since Oscar Robertson. Like, if you want to argue that Harden got snubbed a little bit, I get it. But I mean, I don't know. That was a situation where they were a clear playoff team, so it was hard for me to just rule out the. I don't know. Like Westbrook had plenty of arguments there for me. I guess was the point.
There was something else that went on because I kind of caught it on social media as I got back into the US. People were either upset with LeBron or mad at a comment he made. I don't know if it was political, so if it was political, we can
Oh, it
stay
was
away from it.
political. Oh yeah,
Okay.
no, it was political. I mean, the short version is, I mean, we don't need to get into it, but
Yeah.
there was a girl, Makia Bryant in Columbus, got shot. She was 16 years old. She was shot by the
Mm,
police. Um, it was an incident where they got called out. She had a knife in her hand. She was involved in a fight of some sort. She ended up dead.
mm,
Um, LeBron had at the time, because this was after Derek Chauvin got convicted, so obviously rest in peace George Floyd. Derek Chauvin got convicted on murder charges, and then so following that, LeBron tweeted a picture of the officer, and I believe it said something like "You're next" or something like that.
okay.
Needless to say, there were people that weren't happy about that.
I can
Um,
imagine. Yeah.
so I mean, there was some backlash about that.
Okay. Okay. So
And
yeah,
I mean,
so it was
he since
political. I was,
yeah, it was political. He
yeah,
deleted the tweet, and it has since clarified and talked about that. I'm not here. I'm not going to rip on LeBron for that. Like,
of
it,
course.
yeah, people make mistakes. It is what it is. You know, LeBron's more right than this than wrong about. But yeah, people LeBron returned. I mean, the big story with them is that they're getting healthy. Anthony Davis is back. Obviously Andre Drummond's been in the lineup now for a while. You saw that a little bit before he left, but he's continuing to get worked into that lineup. I mean, not really too much has changed in the West. Houston is still leading the tank race as of now. They only have
Yeah.
16
Well,
wins. Minnesota and Orlando have 20. Orlando's won two straight, so they've done themselves, or excuse me, they beat Memphis by 1 point the other night, so they didn't do themselves any favors there. Detroit's now back in sole possession of worst in the Eastern Conference. Cleveland, low key, is sitting at 21 as well. And one of the big things you might have missed it was Kevin Love just totally throwing the ball away in the middle of a game, just inbounding it, and Stanley Johnson picking up the ball and getting a dunk. But a lot of people were mad about that. And I mean, it's pretty inexcusable. Like, I don't know what Kevin Love is doing there. And it's like, dude, even if you're frustrated, you can't do that in a game and just throw a fit like that, especially when you're supposed to be the veteran leader on this team. Like, this
yeah.
Cleveland team is young; they're supposed to be growing. This is a team that's expected to be good now. So it's like, I understand Kevin Love may be frustrated. He was playing competitive basketball and winning championships not that long ago, but you also signed the max extension in Cleveland. Like, you knew
Yeah.
what it was when LeBron left, that this wasn't going to be as competitive anymore. I'm not mad at you. Sign the max deal, get your money, but I don't know. Like, that's disappointing. It's like, Kevin Love, come on, man. You've been in this league for how long? Like, you just can't do that.
Yeah, so some of the things that kind of stick out to me in the standings is the Clippers. Well, I guess technically they're tied with that half game back, so they still got a game there. But the Nuggets in third is kind of surprising, and I guess it's
Yeah.
like it's like a short-lived excitement because then you see who's in sixth, and it's like, oh, the Lakers, great.
Well, that's the thing. It's the irony of it all is that the Nuggets have played so well since Jamal Murray went down, and they're unfortunately not doing themselves any favors right now. They're sitting. You would almost
Yeah,
rather be in that four spot and play Dallas or play Portland,
it,
and obviously, like, the Lakers are tied with Dallas right now, so there's
yeah,
still
there's
this could very well change quickly.
yeah,
But the gap between 4 and 5 in the West is 6 games at this point. I mean, the Clippers and the Nuggets are jockeying for 3 and 4. Utah and Phoenix are still jockeying for 1 and 2. I mean,
well,
Denver and the Clippers
and
could catch those teams, but
yeah.
Utah and Phoenix are playing so well that I can't see them making up this margin with this little time left.
Well, and that's what I was gonna say. At this point, it's what most teams have nine. It's between nine. I guess San Antonio has 10. It's between 10 games and 7 games left in the season, which is
Mhm.
right around the time I like to call the last 10 games the strength of schedule season. You look at
Yeah.
you like to go look at that stuff and
Oh,
see
yeah.
where they're at. That's my favorite thing to do, and we'll definitely look at that today. As we go on here, but yeah, the Utah Jazz, Phoenix Suns, number 1 and number 2. That hasn't really changed since I left. Um, Still kind of surprised at how close it is, though, even in the lower part of it between I guess you could throw the Trailblazers in there a little bit. I mean, the Trailblazers are right up on the Lakers. And again, when we talk about the play-in tournament, we'll talk about, who has tiebreakers and who's where. But, between the Grizzlies, Warriors, Spurs, and even Pelicans, it's only a few games. The Grizzlies and Warriors essentially tied, just a half game played between them. And then it's just a game after that for the Spurs. So, both the Warriors and Spurs sit at 500. So I'd like to see where that goes. And that's kind of why, back to that Jokic conversation, I wonder, if Curry would even have a shot if essentially this guy who's supposed to be the MVP of the league only gets the team into a play-in tournament to potentially get bounced in the first round, because that'll be something we talk about with the play-in tournament too, is like, okay, so you're going to make them go through a mini tournament just to get to the big tournament. They're going to be gassed, like it's going to be, it's a tough situation. So I like it as a viewer standpoint. I think it's awesome because it gives us more basketball, more competitive basketball, because you can claim those teams that are on the cusp of potentially making playoff runs are younger teams, and you get them that kind of playoff experience. I think that's a lot of fun, but players may not feel the same, which I think is what Luka was kind of talking about, earlier before I left for the honeymoon.
Well, yeah, he's trying to avoid it. He's basically like, look, if we've been in the 7th or 8th seed, we've had, a whole body of work. I know it's not a full 82 game season this year, but it's like we've done this the whole year. Why do we have to go out and re-earn it again?
Right. Like why go out? Right. Like why go out and get bounced by a 10th seed potentially, like that could be a problem.
Well, it hurts your draft position, and I mean, it was different in the bubble where you didn't finish the regular season, so I think everybody was okay with that when it was a one-time thing. I think there were less arguments there, but in this situation, I do think it becomes a little bit of a harder sell. We'll see what happens. I mean, if the play-in is really fun this year, then maybe it's a different story. But I mean, yeah, you've got if you're 7-8 right now, that first game matters, whether you get the 7 seed or whether you then have to play a whole nother game against the winner of the 9 and 10 game. Like, it's just extra basketball too on top of that. So we've already seen a ton of injuries this year. And with Pete guys missing times and with the more compacted schedule, like I don't know. I can understand the frustrations with it this year in particular more than any other year. All right, so looking at the East, what do you think about that? Anything in particular stand out in your Eastern Conference standings?
Eastern Conference. I know one of the things I jokingly sent to you and Tim on Facebook was that I was appreciative of the Sixers not winning once while I was away.
Yeah, not a single game. No, not one.
It looks like they've won since, which is nice. They're on a 3-game win streak, so that's good. I mean, the Knicks being in 4th, technically, depending on games played and stuff like that, and win percentage over the Hawks is kind of surprising. Hawks being at 5th also surprises me a little bit. Those two popped up. Pacers, maybe I just didn't notice it that they were dropping so quickly, but being in 9th is kind of surprising. I felt like they were kind of in the mix with the Celtics there for a little bit. Other than that, it looks like the Heat kind of were able to make themselves a little bit of a run. I know they were kind of towards the bottom. Maybe they're just still where they were, tied with the Celtics at 34 and 30. So really, honestly, the movement was in the West, except for the Hawks and Knicks Knicks being where they were, but staying where they were, I guess is what I should say. And then the Hawks making a little bit of a run.
Yeah, the Hawks, since Nate McMillan has taken over, has just have made an incredible push. And obviously, I mean, they've got Trae Young back now. That's the big news in Atlanta this week. That'll obviously allow them to compete a whole lot more. They're trying to hold off Miami and Boston. And I mean, they've got a 3-game lead on Charlotte now for that 8 spot, but obviously trying to avoid getting out of that 7 seed and, trying to hang out in that 5 or 6 safe space. And I mean, if you're Atlanta, who would you rather have in the first round, I guess is the question. There's the Knicks at 4, who you would match up with now, and who you'd obviously rather play the Knicks, as fun as they played, as good as they've been this year, and as fun as they are, and as good defensively as they are. I'd still rather play the Knicks than Milwaukee or Philly or Brooklyn.
Of course. And I think, honestly, from a viewer standpoint, I think the NBA would want that. You have 2 younger teams that are on the up and up. You get some really excitement in that. You can get 2 teams that are essentially getting like their first playoff experience with these guys. I really would love to see the Knicks and the Hawks in the first round of the NBA playoffs. I think like a casual fan would look at that and be like, I don't really care who comes out of this, but I think again, like I said, with the younger teams, I think it's kind of cool. Potentially, maybe set up some little rivalry type vibes for years to come with these guys. I think that would be big.
I
And
want
yeah,
Knicks Celtics. I'm not gonna lie. I want it for the
you
history and
do.
the intensity. I
Okay.
do. I want it for the intensity. It's nothing against Atlanta. Like if Atlanta plays New York, it's going to be entertaining, and Atlanta has a better, shot of winning that series, of course, than they would otherwise. Likewise with Boston, but no, I want the intensity in the first round. I would love to see a New York Boston series. The same kind of goes for Miami as well. But Boston is the one too, where it'd be like, nah, New York and Boston is always fun.
Yeah. No, and I agree. I think that would be cool. I just think when you look at the teams, and maybe it's because I'm still a believer and I've been burnt by the Celtics so many times in the past, I just feel like the Celtics are a better team than their record shows. And I wonder if when the playoff starts, it starts to click a little quicker for them, you know?
I mean, that Tatum 60-point game the other night against San Antonio with that 32-point comeback is crazy, and you
Right.
wonder if that's not the game where momentum. It certainly does feel though like every time with the Celtics, because it has. It's like every time you start to believe in them and think they're hitting their potential of how good we think they can be, they just go out and have this really weird loss where it just feels like they're lifeless, and that's going to be the
Yeah.
question as we get into the end of the season. But I mean, the talent is on that roster. There's no doubt about it. When you've got Jason Tatum, when you've got Jalen Brown, when you've got Kemba Walker, like I. I wouldn't want to play them in the first round, put it that way. Like if I'm New
Right.
York, I'd rather play Atlanta. Atlanta, for the large part, hasn't been here before. I mean, I know a
And
couple of the vets, role player wise, have, but like Trey Young and John Collins, like Kevin Herter, these are all young guys that have never been here before.
And I think that's why that could be a fun series, because you'll have the Hawks being like, yeah, we want the Knicks. And you'll have the Knicks being like, yeah, we want the Hawks. Like both
Yeah.
teams want each other. So then that creates a little bit of a pettiness and oh, you think we're not as good? Well, here we go. Like, so I don't know. I think it could be a lot of fun with that. So other than that, everything standing wise kind of seems about the same. Everyone's where I remember them being. Nobody kind of sticks out other than you know, the the Nuggets kind of moving up there a little bit, and even the Mavericks moving up a little, and the Lakers dropping.
Yeah, the Mavericks have been kind of streaky this year too. They've been real up and down. They've had while you were gone, they had some bad losses, but they're hanging tough. They're at 6 right now, and so at the end of the day, if you're out of the play, and like that's the main goal for Dallas,
Well,
it's something that they've talked about.
and it's crazy too, like everyone was harping on Luka
Well,
real
they're 5
early.
right now. Excuse.
Yeah, but even that is like, they're harping on Luka this whole season, kind of being like, "Oh man, he's doing well, but we kind of expected more for him to be winning and blah blah blah." And but then you obviously don't get that kind of narrative who with the team they're essentially tied with the Lakers, who get this kind of pass because it's LeBron James and
Well,
there's
the
been
title.
injuries. I know. I'm just saying.
Mavs won the title last year. No one is giving them crap for this either. Lakers won the title this year. Lakers
I
haven't been
know.
healthy. As soon as they get healthy, no one's really going to be worried about that.
We'll see. I have some chemistry questions with the Lakers, and some things Frank Vogel said the other day made me a little worried about it, but we'll talk about that when we get into the Lakers a little bit more.
Yeah, we'll get into that here in a second. Welcome everybody to the Driving Dish NBA podcast. My name is Kevin Rayfuse. Joining me as always, fresh off his wedding and honeymoon, Justin Kuzart.
Tonight was fun and games until Markelle Fultz threw chocolate milk on me. We finna fight after that one.
Was that Cole Anthony?
Yeah, it was.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean that's the thing is like soaking with water and Gatorade, like that's fine. That rinses off easy. Like I love chocolate milk, but chocolate milk is disgusting. If you pour that on your head, like that's all in your hair, and it's gonna smell on your clothes. And, ugh, no,
Yeah.
the milk is nasty. So I understand where Cole Anthony is coming from here. I get it.
There has to be like a approved and not approved list of liquids you can dump on somebody after an exciting game or a big
Yeah,
win.
yeah, like it's got to be the water or the Gatorade. Anything else is just kind of like if you pour soda on somebody, it's like man, that's gross. You're gonna be sticky and it
Yeah.
stains and
But
ugh.
like even you got to put champagne on there, obviously, and so
Well, that's different. Yeah, champagne is if you win the title, the champagne is just it is what it
right.
is. You got to do that.
Or
That's just
beer. I mean,
part of
beer's
the
the
game.
same thing. They'll have the
Yeah,
cans and do their stuff. So,
right. And honestly, beer probably comes out better than chocolate.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be willing to bet that.
Imperial stouts on each other. Leave us a review on iTunes, good or bad. We will read them here on the podcast. If you are not an Apple user, Stitcher, Google Play Store, Spreaker, Player FM, TuneIn, Amazon Music, Spotify. We are everywhere you can find a podcast.
Yes, and be sure to check out the new and improved Drive and Dish podcast on YouTube. Just search Drive and Dish NBA on YouTube. We will pop up. You can find us there, and all will be good. You can watch a video version of the podcast.
No, word from our sponsors.
So let's get into LeBron being back. I think we kind of expected him to be back around this time. Now, what has been going on essentially is he hasn't been really working out. He hasn't been practicing because the trainers want him to reduce the swelling as much as possible or not have any swelling. So he's kind of been just chilling. He comes back Friday night against the Kings, drops 16 points, 7 assists, 8 rebounds. Looks good. LeBron did come out saying there's urgency to get me back. Obviously, you see where they are in the standings, and the playoffs are just around the corner, so you want to get him up to speed. I get that. He said his ankle was a little tight at times. That's probably expected. The one thing that did worry me, though, is a few comments that have come out. Anthony Davis said, we haven't played much defense since we got back from that East Coast trip. They are still the number one defensive rated team in the for the season, but they are 21st in the league since the East Coast trip, which Lakers film room tweeted out the other day. So shout out to them for that stat. And then the other thing is Silver Screen and Roll, the SB Nation Lakers page, put out an article that essentially said the Lakers are practicing against NBA teams for 9 more games this season. You can watch them on TV, which I thought was hilarious. But to that point, you've got Vogel coming out saying, like, we don't have enough time to look at every lineup that we like. We don't have enough time for those guys to find chemistry for the playoffs, which is a little worrisome. They're essentially going to be using these last few games as a way to get on the same page and hopefully find a few lineups that they feel good with going into the playoffs, which I think if you're the Lakers should be a little concerning, the fact that we're 9 games out and because of injuries, we don't have the chemistry set right now.
Yeah, and I mean that would be the only worrisome part is that they all haven't really played together like that. But I guess I'm just not super duper worried about. Like, to me, I'm more impressed by the fact that the Lakers have had Anthony Davis miss a significant amount of time, have had LeBron James miss a significant amount of time, and they're still the number 1 overall rated defense in the NBA. Like, that to me shows, hey, that's way more encouraging. Showing once we're back, once we have this chemistry back together, we can still be this elite defensive team that can go back and win the finals. Like, I haven't backed off that Lakers are still the best team in the NBA thing. Like, yeah, I think these last couple of the games of regular season have the potential to be rough. I mean, we're looking at their schedule. You've got Toronto, but then you've got a stretch against Denver, LA, Portland, who's trying to stay out of that play-in game, Phoenix, and then New York before you finally get kind of an easier end of the season. Your last 3 are against Houston, Indy, and New Orleans. So in theory, with those, they're a little bit lighter. But I mean, every one of those teams that we mentioned before that is going to be playing for seeding. So I think that there's going to be, like, there's a chance they lose a bunch of these games. And I think it's tough with LeBron because, again, you want him to be healthy. You don't necessarily have the luxury, though, of like, nobody you are going to play in the first round is going to be a pushover, put it that way. Like,
of course
even
not.
if you're looking, like, if let's say they're 6 and it ends how it is today, you got Denver in the first round. Now, I know Denver doesn't have Jamal Murray, but still, that's no easy out. We just sang their praises a little bit earlier. If you get up to 5, you've got the Clippers. You've got, you drop to 7 and you go into the play-in game. You've got either the Suns or then you've got the Jazz if you drop all the way to 8. Obviously, I don't think anyone's worried about the Lakers missing the playoffs through the play-in game. Like, I think they're going to be just fine. But, you don't have that. If you're in the Eastern Conference, I don't really think it is to the extent that it was earlier where you have a first round series that you could take off. Like, this isn't the past even couple of years where the 7 and 8 may not have been as serious. But, you really can't do it in the West. I mean, you're going to have to figure out your chemistry on the fly. Now, again, I think the Lakers figure it out. I'm not necessarily long-term worried about that. But am I more worried about them having, the Lakers had this short off season. They're going to go back into this grueling playoff scenario. You don't want to necessarily play a 7-game series in the first round. Like if they end up playing the Clippers in the first round, we definitely could see that be a 7-game series.
Well, and honestly, you want to know the fastest way that play-in tournament will never happen again is if LeBron and the Lakers. No, yeah, not even that. If the Lakers go into the play-in tournament, have to play what? Essentially I think it's 2 games to get into the 7th spot, right? Get into the 7th spot. And then they lose to whoever's in the number 2 spot, say it's the Jazz, say it's the Suns. And LeBron James comes out and blames the play-in tournament. Damn sure the NBA that's never coming back ever again. Like we won't ever see
so
it.
Fast.
So,
nope.
So
I don't think they're they're gonna be able to do just enough to avoid it. Like those last 3 are so huge. And honestly, I think they could probably come out. This Toronto game should be a must-win too, given where Toronto is in the standings right now. Like that's the type of game I think that they need to win if they're going to stay out of this game. Dallas has been inconsistent, so I think they'll have chances to avoid that scenario. And at the end of the day, if they handle their business, like they are up right now, a full game on Portland, and they're up multiple or 4 on Memphis. So it's really only Portland that you have to worry about catching them. They have a big one with Portland on May 7th. And so that's going to be, that could very well be a play-in game or not for them. So, I know it's going to be a practice, but like it could be with playoff intensity real quick.
Yeah. Well, and maybe that helps LeBron James get up to speed, quicker than normal. I will say during the shout out to tankathon.com with the strength of schedule stuff, we always pull it up around this time of year. The Lakers are sitting at number 10 in terms of strength of schedule. Like you were saying, against a bunch of teams that are going to be, kind of fighting for a playoff spot and probably needing to win those games as well. So not going to be an easy end of the season. And I think add on the fact that Vogel's like, we're still trying to figure it out, I think is a little concerning for the Lakers. But like you said, if there's anybody that can handle it, it's probably LeBron James and the Lakers. I do kind of hope we do end up, honestly, we saw it at the beginning of the season, right after the Harden trade. I think the matchup that people want is Lakers Nets, because you get these 2 almost opposite mindsets of basketball going at it, where the Nets are just full on offense and the Lakers are the best, potentially, right? Not right now because we've just talked about it, but the best defense in the NBA. What do you do when you've got a really strong offense and a really strong defense going up against each other? I think it could be a really fun thing, and I think that would be the best narrative for nationally and the NBA.
Yeah, that's definitely the one that, if I'm Adam Silver, I think that's, of course, the matchup that I want. I don't think it's a lock, but I think if I was also a betting man, if you're setting the favorites, it would still be those 2 at this point. I don't think anybody's quite gone off that ledge. All right, who's balling, who's falling? Our NBA version of the stock market. We always like to start with the good before the bad. Justin, welcome back. You get to go first. Who is balling for you this week?
We already talked about him a little bit. Luka becoming the 2nd fastest player to reach 35 career triple-doubles. Congratulations to him. He had a 31 point, 12 rebound, and 21 assist game the other day versus Washington with just a 1-point win. So shout out to him. He's also just the 4th player in NBA history to total 30-plus points, 10-plus rebounds, and 20-plus assists in a single game. Luka just balling out.
Yeah, I mean, he's special. There's no doubt about it. What else is there to say? A lot of the issues of the Mavericks this year have just kind of been the roster around them. Is that they made a couple moves that just haven't worked out. For example, Steph Curry for Josh Richardson trade really looks like a fleecing for Philly so far.
Well, and weren't they trying to trade Porzingis at one point too during the season?
It came up. I mean, there was that report this week that that Porzingis and Luka are still not on the same page, that they don't necessarily get along. Now, Mark Cuban came out and just kind of downplayed that and was, basically being like, hey, this is work. It happens. But that's certainly not what you want to hear. Dallas, when they traded for Porzingis, obviously the ideal was that these were going to be your guys going forward, that this was going to be your team, your long-term answer, your next future here in Dallas. So obviously Luka is the guy for whatever future is happening in Dallas. But and they got to get a couple other things worked out. But yeah, shout out to Luka. I mean, no doubt about it. He's not going to win the MVP that I think many people, he was the preseason favorite to win the MVP, no doubt about it.
For
I mean,
sure.
hell, I
Yeah.
thought he could win the MVP too. But yeah, what a season, what a talent he is. All right, balling for me this week, I've got Domantas Sabonis, who casually recorded a triple double against the Thunder the other night in the first half. He had 22 points, 11 rebounds, 11 assists. His final stat line on the night was 26 points, 19 rebounds, and 14 assists. Indiana just absolutely blew the doors off Oklahoma City, 152-95. Wow, though. I mean, what a line to get that in the first half. And I know OKC is just fully in the tank at this point. They're been pretty shameless about it, honestly. But whew, that's definitely one for the books.
I saw a Reddit thread that was really upset with OKC, who is blatantly tanking. What is it? Al Horford's been on paternity leave for like 3 months or something like that.
Yeah, they just shut him down casually. Like they basically said to Al, like, it wasn't even like with Andre Drummond where they're like, oh, we're gonna trade you, like you're gonna play somewhere else. So basically with Al Horford was like, yeah, we're not gonna trade you, like we're kind of too good with you in the lineup, so why don't you just go sit down for a little bit? They're not even playing Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I know he's been hurt
because he's gonna win them games.
Yeah, he is going to win him games. He was winning them games. That was the problem. And so it is pretty shameless. I mean, the craziest OKC stat for me this year was when their average starting lineup, the one game, was younger in age than Gonzaga's average starting lineup when they were playing in the national title game this year. And it was just like, whoa, that is really, really something. I mean, you got a lot of guys on that OKC roster that, people are worried about. I mean, they sat Lou Dort the other night. For God's sake, like
too close to winning them games. Hey, if you want to play, don't win us games. By the way, shout out to anybody named Sam that is all about the tank. So Sam Presti, Sam Hinkie, we love it.
Yeah. I mean, look, OKC's the best OKC's ever been is when they drafted all those guys. So
exactly. So all right. So my fallen, as long as I can pull it up, yes, was another Reddit thread. That brought up the fact that Russell Westbrook has had more triple doubles in the last 5 seasons than the number of games the Chicago Bulls have won in the last 5 seasons. And then someone chimed in and said you can also throw the Knicks on there. They only won 133 games. The Bulls have won 138. His name, for whatever reason I can't say right now, Westbrook, has had 140 triple doubles.
That's crazy. That's right. Like I appreciate the fall because at first I'm like, wait, what's wrong with this for Russ? I was like, that's pretty great. And the Wizards are playing well, but no, that's wild. And I mean, for the Knicks this year, you obviously don't care as much because the Knicks are the number 4 seed in the Eastern Conference right now. So whatever. Things are good in New York, but yeah, for Chicago, I think it's double salt in the wound for Chicago because not only is that, an insult there and a reminder of how bad they've been the past couple of years, Russell Westbrook racking up these triple doubles and get Washington back into the mix is a big reason that, and Zach LaVine getting COVID are a big reasons why Chicago, who was, when you go in and you trade for Vucevic, is actively trying to make the playoffs. Now they're sitting comfortably out of it. I mean, they're at 11 right now. They're 3 games back. Them in Toronto, they would need to do a lot of work and get a lot of help to really even try to catch Washington in this last swing of things.
Yeah. So, it's a testament to Westbrook and obviously the dominance that he has. But yes, between that's a few things that I must have missed too while I was out was the COVID stuff for the Bulls and Westbrook just really trying to make him that, final team to get into that playoff tournament, which, by the way, if you're in 10th place, you are in that playoff tournament. So, makes things interesting.
Not to talk about my fantasy basketball team too much, but I have James Harden was my number 1 pick, who obviously is out and continuing to deal with his hamstring. He's not going to play the rest of the year. Whatever. I knocked the rest of my drafting so far out of the park that it hasn't mattered. Like, I'm still probably going to be in my finals, but like Zach LaVine got COVID. He's been out 2 weeks. De'Aaron Fox, who's been absolutely crazy since the All-Star break, has been out for 2 weeks. He's got COVID as well. And I'm just like, does everyone else on my team just want to get COVID? Or are we just going to totally implode come playoff time after clinching the number 1 seed? But we don't need to gripe about that too much in the grand scheme of things. Obviously, we hope all these guys get better as well. It's all jokes.
Just a little side comment, because we did talk about how I was out on my honeymoon. Obviously, as you know, to get back into the United States, you have to take a COVID test and test negative. So the resort we were staying at let us had a doctor on staff, and they would do it. Now, I've gotten COVID tests 3 times, including that one. The first time was pretty early on in the pandemic, and when I tell you they like touched my brain, they touched my brain. Like they went up there.
Yeah.
And then the second time was not that bad. They didn't go that deep, and I was like, "Oh, they must have been like, hey, you don't have to absolutely like annihilate their brain and scramble it up to get this thing." The test in Cancun, when I tell you, they went up in my brain, through my brain, back around, down my throat. I was like, "Yo, what is going on?" That was so aggressive. And of course I had to watch my fiance go through it first, or I guess wife go through it first. That I saw her reaction, I went, "Oh no, this is really gonna suck."
But my doom is impending.
Part of me wanted to be like, hey, let me go first and I'll show you. Just so that I didn't have to like see her reaction and then be like, "Oh no, this is really gonna be bad." But then you have to do that kind of stuff. So
ligament in his left wrist, a fracture on his palm. He re-aggravated his wrist on April 9th. He missed 11 days, returned for 5 games, attempting to play through the injury, and obviously just re-aggravated it. You would assume Kelly Oubre is probably done for the year now. So with Golden State, this is a team that's in 9th. They're tied with San Antonio for 10th. Again, they have had a 3-game lead on the Pelicans, so you're not necessarily worried about dropping out. But you're going to need Kelly Oubre if you're going to jump Memphis, who you're only a half game behind right now. Again, there's a big difference with that 8 game. There's a potential to jump all the way up to 7 and then get guaranteed that first round playoff series. It's just less games for them to play. Obviously, this is a big blow for their rotation, and what's just been pretty much the peak nightmare season for the Warriors at this point.
yeah, you look at their schedule left. I mean, they have the Jazz, the Suns, the Grizzlies. They do play OKC twice, and we've already had our comments about
Well, they'll
OKC.
win them. Oh, yeah, they'll win them. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, and then they play the Pelicans 3 more times. So, they do kind of, in a way, control their destiny. I mean, 2 teams that I don't necessarily believe they'll beat, depending on schedule or depending on timing, and if the Jazz and Suns need to win those specific games. We'll see where that lands up. But yeah, it's going to be a tough one for them. But, as we'll transition obviously in a second here to this playoff thing. As we look at it, it kind of just sticks with the same mentality of, if you're in the West, it's a lot harder than if you're in the East, because you're playing mostly West Coast teams or mostly East Coast teams. And that kind of, when you look at the strength of schedule, dictates that. I would like to throw out there the team that apparently has the easiest schedule for the rest of the season in 9 games is our Philadelphia 76ers, which I am very happy about.
We talked about this extensively, and that's why I'm encouraged. I mean, they just beat a back-to-back with Atlanta. They beat OKC before that, I think on Monday. I mean, that's the reason, because they're still, I believe they're still a half game behind Brooklyn.
Yep.
Yeah,
1 game. No, half
they're
game.
half game behind Brooklyn. They've got the game in hand, so they can jump and get to 1. But it's what Ryan and I talked about extensively last week. That it's like, look, if you're number 2, you're getting Milwaukee likely in the second round, and there's a big difference between playing Milwaukee and, look, as great as the Knicks have been, I'd take the Knicks 10 out of 10 times, or if it's Boston or whoever comes out of that. The way the bracket is going currently as well, if you're the number 2 seed, you're going to play Miami in the first round. There's a big difference if I'm playing Miami or I'm playing Charlotte or Washington or Indy or one of these play-in teams. Like, listen, I know Charlotte got LaMelo Ball back, and that is, which is crazy. Number 1, that he just fractured his wrist a month ago and is going to be back. Back here for Charlotte and able to play potentially in the playoffs. I mean, that's super fun, obviously, and it's great news for them. And Terry Rozier has continued to play he was dominant the other night. Charlotte's been one of the most fun teams in the league to watch. Obviously, he's good or they're not worried about him being hurt long term. If this was, because to me, obviously, LaMelo is your guy that you build around in Charlotte. I wouldn't go all in necessarily for this 8 seed, but I mean, they've been in playoff position most of the year. So if Charlotte gets into the playoffs, it's a massive success of a season for them, especially with LaMelo Ball having led the way. I think you have to be ecstatic about the future of that franchise going forward. But that play Miami, who was Tatum with Atlanta slips.
Sorry, Kev, I'm going to mute you for a second. Your mic didn't crack, but you dropped out for a second, so I was getting a little worried about that. But kind of to your point with the Brooklyn and 76ers comparison, yeah, you look at it. I mean, Sixers got the Heat, the Spurs, Rockets, which should be a win, Pistons, Magic twice, Bulls, and then Pelicans, like you were saying, where Brooklyn, who has the 12th hardest strength of the schedule, has to go up against the Nuggets, the Bucks twice. The yeah, exactly. And then you got to go up against the Mavs, the San Antonio Spurs, who potentially could be in the play for this play-in tournament, the Cavs, and then the Bulls twice. So things are going to get a little risky for the Nets. And honestly, I like the chances for the Sixers to get that one spot.
No, I do too, and I think they need it. Like that's something we talked about again extensively, is that I don't think Brooklyn needs it. Like Brooklyn is going to be fine. I still would take Brooklyn in the series over Milwaukee. The Sixers, if they're going to beat Brooklyn, don't need to be run ragged by Milwaukee. Now, again, I do think New York is not going to. Again, New York has been the 5th best defensive team in the league this year. They're coached hard by Tibbs. Like they're not going to be in a rollover, assuming they win. Or you get Miami, or you get Boston.
Oh, that was a weird sound too. Sorry, Kev, I'm cutting you off again. That was funky. I've never heard that one before. It sounded like you were in a wave pool. But I think we got you back now. Oh, maybe we don't have you back. All right, we'll try again. Hold on 1 second. All right, I'll take it over to the play-in tournament here for a sec, where we're essentially going to be talking about West and East for the play-in tournament. So what's going to happen here is the play-in tournament will include teams with the 7th through 10th highest win percentages in each conference. I think that's worth mentioning because win percentages could come into play with the COVID stuff. It's going to start May 18th, so it's coming up, and conclude May 21st. Then the NBA playoffs will start Saturday, May 22nd, and conclude no later than July 22nd. So that kind of gives you the vibe for what the tournament will look like. And I guess, Kevin, originally, are you excited for this? I know we kind of talked about, the vibe where like it's kind of cool, but then are you really excited for a team just essentially to go out there and get absolutely stomped by the number 1 seed or number 2 seed potentially?
I mean, yes and no. And I guess that's the thing, is where I like, there's nobody getting in, potentially, put it that way, that I'm not a little bit intrigued in. Like, because they have a 3-game, 4-game lead at this point, I don't think there's going to be any team that just kind of back their way in. Washington, like we said, is playing significantly better. Indy has good players that I'm interested in. Charlotte, and I mean, if Miami's a 7, that's absolutely crazy. Like that's we're talking about a team that was in the finals last year. We're talking about Boston potentially in that mix too. And then over in the Western Conference, there are multiple good teams there as well. So as a purely basketball fan, I like it. I do worry about it long term, but I think they're good matchups. I mean, especially in the Western Conference, like I do want to see if a team like Memphis is going to be able to fight for that. I do want to see if Steph Curry is going to single-handedly will the Warriors into the playoffs and be the team that no one wants to play because what he's capable of. Like even the Spurs, again, they're coached by Popovich. I know they're always going to be the sleeper in this group, but I'm never going to rule out a San Antonio team that's just completely bad. DeMar DeRozan's had a really good season as well down there.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm intrigued all around. I'm genuinely I'm excited about the play-in matchups this year. I'm less in the East again a little bit. As good as Washington. Now, Washington playing so well, I think is really like kind of save that a little bit for me. Like I do want to see Russ. I want to see Bradley Beal. Because if not at that point, I was just like, well, whatever. You could chop off Indy, you could chop off Washington, and just give me Miami and give me Charlotte at that point. I think they've deserved that. I'm okay with them just being the 7 and the 8 seed. I think that's probably who I would want to see anyway. Like I think Charlotte would be an exciting 8 seed matchup. I think there's a lot of young players there to watch and guys who have just broken out this year. In the Western Conference, I'm genuinely like excited across the board of what it could be. Because like we said, I mean, if the Lakers are there, imagine them playing in a play-in game and how ridiculous that would be. Or even if Dallas falls, you've got Luka. With Portland, you've got Dame. Like that to me is going to be much more of a dogfight, and it's what is going to be interesting going forward. Because again, you're going to get a Utah or Phoenix most likely. I think confidently at this point that Denver and the Clippers aren't going to catch them for 1 and 2. I mean, I think those are going to be the heavy favorites to win
Mm-hmm.
any series, but it's not like they're going to be some astounding, overwhelming favorites. Like the Lakers or even them, the Lakers are the team that I would quote unquote be the favorites, but I don't have them as like that. Like just it's not Golden State level favorites where when they had KD the first year with Steph and Clay, where it's just like, yeah, there's no way this team is going to lose. Like
Yeah.
you could talk me into this Lakers team losing to Phoenix. Honestly, you could talk me. You could have definitely with Jamal Murray talked me to them and losing to Denver too.
Yeah, and so I mean, here's kind of how it breaks out in the West. Like you were alluding to, the Dallas Mavericks are in the 5th spot with the 36-27 record. The Lakers right behind them with the 36-27 record. But the thing to hold in mind is Dallas holds the tiebreaker versus the Lakers, so they do have to get ahead of that.
Yeah.
Portland's in the 7th spot with 35-28. And then right behind them, like you said, Memphis at 32-31. Then you have Golden State, who's 32-32, sitting 500, and San Antonio, who's also sitting 500, but they're at 31-31. So the other part that comes into it, we were talking about strength of schedule. The San Antonio Spurs, apparently, according to the Tankathon page, have the hardest strength of schedule going forward. So you probably don't like that, at least for their odds, though. You know, you look at the standings in the Western Conference, I wonder if that potentially brings the Pelicans into play a little bit at the 11th spot. They are, 2 games behind the Spurs at 29-35. I know probably from a casual NBA fan, maybe the NBA would prefer the Pelicans to make it because you get that Zion hype. You can kind of tie a star to it. So you wonder where that ends up going, but that's something else to keep in mind for that. I'm telling you, the teams that make it in, so if it is just the way it is now, you'd have Golden State Warriors and San Antonio Spurs play each other to then potentially, go into a playoff to have to play the Jazz or the Suns. I think teams are going to use that as an excuse at the end of the day. At the end of the day, you have to win, and so that's what it'll come down to. But I think, either of those teams go in there and say it's a sweep, which there's a good chance that's what happens because that's usually how it goes from time to time when a 1 goes up against an 8. Now, you may not get that against the Warriors because Steph Curry can have himself those games, but I think teams, if they get swept in that, will use the play-in tournament as an excuse because, like we talked about with the timing of it all, the play-in tournament's supposed to go from what was it, May 18th to the 21st, then the playoffs start the 22nd. So they, essentially have to play a few extra games. I get it. From a casual fan, I love it because we get this really competitive little tournament before the tournament. But I think the teams are going to have this as a fallback excuse, and that may turn into them not using it in the future. I don't know if the NBA is considering that or if the NBA is like, this is it, this is happening, and you guys don't have a choice. But like we talked about earlier in the episode, if the Lakers end up in this and say they make it to the 7th seed and have to go up against the Suns, and then the Suns just fleece them or even get them in 6 games, I could see LeBron James making a comment, and then
the Suns fleecing the Lakers. Make no bones about it. As much as I think the Lakers are the favorites, and I like LeBron, the Suns fleecing the Lakers would be hilarious in the first round. Like it would be, it would be just an all-time night on NBA Twitter,
dude. It would be great. But it would be great from our because we're just big NBA Twitter guys, but. To that,
like, it'd be great for the people who love parody too. Like the NBA is the sport other than like soccer with the least parody. And it's so if you root for parity, then of course you're rooting for a team like Utah or Phoenix or Denver or somebody that just hasn't been there before. The Lakers do this all the time, and with firepower like that, could very well be doing it again. But I want to flash back to the Spurs scheduled for a second, just because I'm pulled this up. This is sadistic, by the way. Whoever the NBA schedule makers, I mean, what a bet. You've got Philly tonight as of recording this. Then you've got a back-to-back. So tomorrow night, you're going to play in Utah. Then you've got Utah again in Salt Lake City on Wednesday. Then you've got the Kings. That's by far your easiest game left of the year. Because then you've got Portland in Portland against Milwaukee at home, Brooklyn in Brooklyn, New York at the Garden, and then a home and home then 2 home games to end the season against Phoenix. Woof. I mean, that is going to be. You know what? I didn't think the Pelicans were in play as much, but I'll tell you what. Like, and I'll give the Spurs credit. Like, I don't think they're just going to roll over, but that's a tough
How
go
do you?
of it.
Yeah, and then hold on, let me pull up the Pelicans. Pelicans aren't much easier. I mean, just off this schedule. Although while you were saying that, I realized this Tankathon site didn't have every single one of San Antonio's games on here, which worries me a little bit. But New Orleans 8 games. They have Sixers, Lakers, Mavericks, Grizzlies, the Warriors twice, and then the Hornets. So they don't have a walk in the park either.
Yeah, they're going to be playing teams that are competitive. That's the thing. They're not playing teams that are tanking. Like the Sixers' schedule, genuinely, like they have San Antonio and they have Miami, and besides that, they're playing teams that basically aren't playing for anything at this point.
Right? They want to lose.
No reason, yeah, so they should cruise for the most part. Where, yeah, I mean the Pelicans they have that's a every one of those teams really is playing for something to end the year. I mean Golden State, like we said, the playing games they've got, those are going to be 2 big games for them. The Pelicans also just have no margin of error. Like they basically, you kind of got to win out if you're New Orleans, or like you can maybe drop 1 or 2 of these, but it's like if you over at that point, there's no really a situation. I mean, of course, the casuals in the NBA would love that with Zion Williamson, but I do think the Spurs are going to be that 10th seed. I think overall the movement, especially in the East, like the East, and it's surprising the way that Chicago is just totally folded, and Toronto to an extent too. You thought Toronto would be a little bit more competitive, but I mean, I don't really see, given the way that Washington's played, I don't see anybody catching them. Charlotte and Miami or Boston, whoever falls back, or even Atlanta if they fall back to that 7th spot, because Atlanta's only a half game up one. I mean, hell, the Knicks could fall back to the 7th spot. Like, for as good as we talked about the Knicks, like the Knicks are only right now a game and a half up on Miami for 7, so they could very well be in this play-in tournament too. Yeah. Either way, everyone in the East right now from 4 to 10 is going to be either in the playoffs or in the play-in game in some capacity. I just don't really think there's a scenario where Toronto or Chicago catches up on Washington at this point, which is, and again, hat tip to Washington. Like, this is a team that we pretty much wrote off for dead. Like, I didn't think they were going to be in play-in game situation. I thought they'd be playing for ping pong balls. Russ has played really well. He's got the guys out here these past couple of weeks, and a bunch of younger guys who have stepped up, guys that, we largely never heard of.
Yeah, and to that, Chicago's got the 5th hardest schedule going forward, and Toronto's got the 7th hardest schedule going forward. So that doesn't make it any easier on them either. Like you were saying, just kind of the tiebreaker stuff here for anybody that's wondering. Boston in 6th place does hold the tiebreaker over Miami. So that could come into play depending on how that goes. And then Boston. I already said Boston. I doubled up on my thing over here. So that's the one that you want to keep in mind. So they're going to have to not only get there, but they're going to have to get a little bit ahead of it if they are going to make themselves get out of this potential play-in tournament.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I mean, any early predictions? Anybody you think is going to slip standings wise? I mean, I know we got a week left. Next week we'll kind of really be breaking down the home stretch of the schedule as we get closer into the playoffs. But I mean, any bold predictions really for the East for these for this 5, 6, 7, 8 spot? Kind of the same with the West as well. Anybody you think is going to miss or make?
Looking at it. I'm kind of with you on, I think the guys that are there are the guys that are there. I don't think anybody falls out. I don't think the Bulls or Raptors are going to be able to catch them. I wonder, I feel, if I had to predict, I feel more confident in the experience that the Celtics have from the past than the Hawks do under pressure. But this season hasn't really given me any better feelings on that, if that makes sense. But to that, both of them have relatively easy schedules going forward. They're both 25th and 26th in the league for strength of schedule. But looking at the teams, I mean, it's not necessarily the easiest for them. I think Boston has to play Miami a few times, which could become a situation because, they're both going to be playing for spots there. So I don't think the Hawks, honestly, I guess my prediction would be, I think the Hawks, where are the Knicks at with the strength of schedule? So the Knicks are towards the top. So I guess my prediction, just based off strength of schedule and teams trying to vie in, I'm going to say the Hawks and the Knicks flip. and potentially the Knicks end up in the 6th, and the Celtics make it into the 5th and stay pretty safe away from the play-in tournament.
Okay, but you still have the Knicks at 6, though. You have them out of the play-in tournament as well.
Yes, yeah, I think they're going to be close. I still feel, man, what about the Heat?
I like the Knicks team, man. I'm not gonna lie. I think this Knicks team is gonna be well out of the play-in game. I think Boston turns it around too. I'm not as high on
34
Atlanta.
to 35. Dude, but it's only one game is the problem. Like, do you trust the experience that the Heat and Celtics have over the excitement that we've seen this year from the Hawks and Knicks? I guess is the way I'm kind of pinning it.
Yes, I guess I do with the Knicks more than the Hawks. Now, I guess the Hawks are healthy, and again, they have been playing their best basketball of the season, but I don't know. I think Miami guts it out a little bit and gets into 6th. I actually think New York stays at 4. I do think Boston jumps to 5. I think Atlanta, if you're going to talk me into Atlanta staying at 6, so be it. But I think you could see Miami get to 6, have Atlanta be 7, Charlotte be 8, Indy be 9, Washington be 10, or Washington even jump Indy. And then
Yeah.
I think we'll see out of and then in a game. If there was going to be an upset, it would be there.
All right. Sorry, Kev, I'm cutting you off. The connection kind of looked like it disconnected a little bit there. Sorry, I was losing you, but I'll give my final prediction because I've been thinking about this. My final prediction, and it's not against it's not against Hawks and Knicks at all, but it's because if I were to go to experience, I think the Heat and Celtics have it over the Hawks and Knicks. And because it's so close, who has? I think the Hawks have the. We talked about the Hawks hold the tiebreaker, which could mess some things up for this prediction. But I'll do it anyway. I think the Celtics and Heat flip with the Knicks and Hawks. I don't necessarily know where it lines up, but I think the Knicks and the Hawks end up in the 6 and 7, and the Heat and Celtics end up in the 5 and 4 spot. I think those two just jump because of experience a little bit. Well, that's not good that you can't hear me, Kev. Hold on. I don't hear you either. Shoot. I don't hear you. Dang it. We made it an hour in. Oh, dang. Let me do this. Looks like we're having a little bit of technical difficulties with Kevin, though. I feel like, for the most part, we said what we were going to say on this part of the podcast here. So leave us a review on iTunes. We're hopefully going to be able to figure this stuff out a little bit better. The video part of it for us is a newer adventure for us. So be sure to check it out on our podcast page, YouTube. You can just head to Drive and Dish NBA Podcast. Obviously, subscribe to the podcast there, or subscribe to us on any podcasting service that you listen to. You can find us on, I believe. And if you don't, then let us know and we'll find you there as well. We appreciate you listening. Kev dropped out. I wonder if it's a connection thing. So we appreciate you hanging out. And thanks for listening to Drive and Dish NBA Podcast. We'll catch you next week.